You're listening to episode 140, update episode with Chris Dorval. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning into this latest episode of the podcast. And today I have an update episode for you. We're going to be rejoined by past guest Chris Dorval, who was on about 2.5 years ago on episode 66. If you want, you can check out Chris's first episode at thegrassgetsgreener.com/Chris Dorval. And before we get into this, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better, at novni.com. So if you haven't listened to Chris's first episode yet or don't remember it, that's okay. I'll give you a quick summary now. So Chris first joined me to share his story of how the cumulative effects of trauma led him to addiction and how he's been able to overcome that to live a life he never thought possible. Chris had a series of traumatic experiences happen to him when he was growing up. His first experience with trauma was pre-memory, and one of the most significant experiences for Chris was when his parents divorced when he was 12 and he was caught in the middle of it. Also, he found out that he was adopted when he was an early teen. So Chris turned to drugs and alcohol to deal with shame, guilt, and fear that he was feeling. His recovery started with rehab and some male counselors who were very supportive of him. He then had one therapist in particular who really helped him make changes in his life. And also, he had the support of his parents. So now that I've given you a little bit of Chris's background, let me share about what we'll be talking about in this episode. So we're going to hear about the work that Chris is currently doing in the addiction recovery field. We're going to talk about the connection between trauma and addiction. We'll talk about what treatment for addiction might look like. Chris will share the 4 areas that need to be addressed in recovery. He'll also share the next step that you can take to get help if you're struggling with addiction, and also the importance of finding balance in healing from life's challenges. So I think you'll find this to be a really informative episode, and it's certainly a must listen if you or someone that you know struggles with addiction. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this one, and I'll go bring Chris on. Chris, welcome back to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to continue sharing your journey with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on. It's been about 2.5 years since you were first on, and you and I reconnected recently, and you were telling me about the work you've been doing since then, and that you're excited about. And so I definitely wanted to have you back on to give everyone an update. And you're doing some great work in the addiction recovery field. And it's really inspiring to hear about, given your own past struggles with addiction. And I think it provides a lot of hope for anyone who may currently be struggling. So, Chris, start us out by sharing with us what it is you do today.
My primary profession, if you will, is a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm an addiction counselor. And so I have a few roles or a few hats. One is I'm a clinical director at Northeast Addiction Treatment Centers in Quincy, Massachusetts, which offers long-term treatment for folks with substance use disorders and co-occurring mental health conditions. So I've been here for a few months, and I'm really, really enjoying the work and the team and the company that I work with here. It's a really great organization. Also work at Rhode Island College, managing a grant there to introduce screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment for folks in multiple different settings for helping identify substance use problems or issues before they reach the level of clinical significance, if you will. And so that's been really rewarding too, is to work in some different populations, different hospitals, working with a lot of doctors and nurses and other social workers as well to kind of, you know, bring addiction awareness to some other avenues, which has been really rewarding. And then on top of that, private practice and some private consulting and training as well. And, and all this free time that I can gather, it's, being a dad and being a husband.
Hmm. Wow, sounds like you have a lot of great stuff going on.
Yeah. It's never a dull moment, but it's all good.
That's good. And so all the work that you're doing, are those all new positions since you were last on 2.5 years ago?
Yeah. So the last time I was on, I was working with Dan Griffin for Griffin Recovery Enterprises, which is a great and amazing opportunity, and to travel and do some consulting around the country.
Yeah, and Dan was also a past guest of the show,
Yeah, he was,
which
and
is how we got
so
connected, I believe.
yeah. Dan had kind of introduced us, and it was a great connection, and I loved working with Dan. I loved working for Dan. For me, it was really being more home centric and being more physically present for my family that made that kind of helped influence the decision to kind of switch and change careers. And I'm forever grateful to Dan and the work and the opportunities that he provided me. But at the same time, it's been a new chapter for me in really building my career up here in the Northeast.
Hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, anything else that's been, sort of new for you since last time?
There's a couple of new things. One, really positive thing is that my family just recently moved into a new house, which has been nice. It's kind of our dream house, if you will. So we're really happy about that. It's been a really uh, great experience, kind of settling in and adjusting. But one of the things, and it's probably kind of serendipitous that our call is happening today. But about a year ago now, I dealt with another pretty significant life changing event in losing my father, which has been, something that I've been kind of processing over the last year. Some really difficult grief. I don't know if there's ever easy grief, but some really difficult grief and kind of working through that process.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. No. So I'm curious, in the work that you're doing now, so it sounds like you're working with a lot of people who are battling with addictions currently.
Yeah.
Are you
And,
kind of like,
one of the
are
big,
you working sort of one-on-one with them?
yeah, so in my role, and part of the reason that I was attracted to come here, and part of the reason that they were excited to have me was my history in working and doing a lot of specific work with trauma within the addiction or substance use community. And so, I've kind of been able to create an opportunity here where I do a lot of really direct work with people on trauma resolution work, using different therapies that I have training in, whether it's EMDR or EFT or mindfulness or prolonged exposure or cognitive behavioral therapy that really addresses their specific trauma stuff. So, it's been a big part of the work that I do here. And it's been really rewarding, and equally as challenging. When you look at the overlap in the addiction treatment world of how many folks are dealing with underlying or unaddressed or unresolved traumatic stress or trauma related issues, it's mind boggling. And looking at our census right now, I'd say 80 to 90% of the people here have what you would consider a diagnostic criteria for, criterion A for post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of them have been able to adjust and resolve and have a lot of resiliency, and others, not so much. And so, a big part of my process every day is working directly with patients and then working with the clinicians that I supervise to be able to provide the best care from a trauma-informed approach.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. So are you finding that a lot of people who you're coming across that they have a background of trauma?
I'd say almost all of
Hmm.
them have a background, and one of the things that I've been noticing is how, particularly in the addiction or substance use treatment world, is it's so normalized for a lot of our folks. The normalization of really unhealthy stress, from experiencing a physical or sexual assault to, just really, like even more, covert traumas like the bullying or the neglect or the family maltreatment that exists to, just some really dangerous situations that people have found themselves in through the process of their active addiction, whether it's, armed robberies or violent crimes that they've either, perpetrated or experience that happened as a result of active addiction. It's amazing the pervasiveness of trauma within this population, and how, like I said, how overlooked it is because of the, everybody focuses so much on the symptom of the substances and the use, and when you look underneath the underlying etiology or the underlying, issue that is driving a lot of their use is this impact of stress and trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, I know when you were on before and you were sharing your story, you were talking about how, the traumas that you had gone through growing up, led you down the path of addiction that you ended up on as well. So I know that you kind of, understand that connection firsthand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, both my personal experiential knowledge with, trauma recovery, as well as my educational and clinical background has, given me this, opportunity for insight to be able to really help both, clinicians work with folks as well as working directly with individuals who are experiencing this. Because one of the things that I've learned about trauma and trauma treatment and addressing trauma is it's deeply individual and unique to the individual with whom experiences it. A lot of times folks, and I identify with this myself, would look at my own past experiences and compare them to others and say, well, I didn't have it as bad as so and so, or I didn't grow up in a war-torn country, or I didn't experience this trauma, so my trauma is not as bad. And then the one of the things I always say, and I forget if I mentioned it the last time that we were on the air together or we had talked together, was that the worst story you'll ever hear is your own. Because it affects you and the people that you love and care about. And yes, people may have experienced, bigger or greater things, but ultimately our stories are equally as important because they happen to us. And I think honoring and validating that for some people, especially within the addiction or substance use community, because there's such rampant shame associated with the disease of addiction, helps kind of alleviate and bring light to that so that folks can really own their own recovery and own their own healing, especially when it comes to trauma.
Yeah, it's so important to kind of, to acknowledge what you've gone through, and to not, minimize that or downplay it or compare it to what other people have been through. I mean, like you said, it's what you experience. It's affecting you. It's impacting you. And that's, really the only thing that matters. Doesn't matter, if you think someone else has had it worse than you um, and that you shouldn't, be as affected as they are or what have you. The point is you went through it. It's affecting you. And, let's address that and let's acknowledge that. So I think it's great that, in the work that you're doing, you are, understanding where people are coming from and looking at, the cause and not just the symptom. So I think that's really great, Chris. And
Thank you.
yeah, so I'm curious now, for people who kind of, go into treatment for addiction, do they tend to, is there kind of a, an average amount of time that people tend to be in treatment for, or does that really just kind of depend on the person?
It varies from person to person, and that there's so many factors that weigh into a person's length of stay or continuum of treatment.
Hmm.
All evidence supports that the longer a person stays engaged in active treatment, the better off their potential outcomes may be, as well as from a quantitative perspective of looking at how long they've been able to remain abstinent, to a qualitative perspective where they talk about how much better they feel about their life. But we also understand, that people are trying to do this within the context of their own lives, and they have, work and responsibilities and families and other things. So, one of the things that I, spend a lot of time working with folks on is kind of establishing a balance between their recovery and their, lifetime responsibilities. But I think one of the things that often gets overlooked, particularly not just in substance use, but in behavioral health in general, is, the seriousness of these diseases and the illness of depression or anxiety or traumatic stress or addiction, and how devastating they are both to a person's social, psychological, spiritual, and biological life. So, one of the things I guess to kind of, circle back to the initial question, the longer a person can stay in treatment, obviously, the better the outcome. But at the same time, what treatment means can also, vary. It's not necessarily 6 months or a year in an inpatient hospital program, so there's various level of care. And I think that one of the best ways to do it is to have kind of a phased model or a different level where people are slowly integrating back into, from a higher, more intense level of care to a lower, less intense level of care over a period of time, rather than the 30-day fix where you go one place and you're there. And it happens quite frequently where people come to me for treatment and it's almost as if they're dropping their car off at the garage and they want to, change some plugs and wires and, send me back to work in 30 days or 2 weeks and I'll be fine. And the reality is it's, recovery, whether it's from addiction, trauma, depression, whatever it is a lifelong journey and it requires continued support and maintenance. And so the longer that we can extend or connect that person with engagement and treatment and recovery activities, the better they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there particular things that you find help people? I know, like you were talking about last time for your own situation, that for you it was just getting a lot of support. You had some counselors that were supportive of you and a therapist. So are there things that you see that are helpful?
I think addiction, and trauma as well, you know what I mean? There's such an overlap or connection between the two, but, they're both of these areas, affect a person, as I mentioned earlier, both biologically, psychologically, socially, and finally spiritually. And that all four of these areas need to be addressed, so there are potential medications or biological interventions that can help stabilize the person and establish some sense of connection. That could be really helpful, and that could be anywhere from medication-assisted treatment options all the way to just routine physical checkups and dental visits. When we talk about psychological therapy, is extremely important and extremely effective. It's kind of my bread and butter of what I do. So I recognize that as being one of the most important things to be able to understand and explore our past, our present, and then our future lives in therapy. Social connection, developing and establishing relationships. I mean, we're human beings and we're social creatures by nature. So feeling a sense of connection, whether it's in employment, at home, family relationships, friend, peer relationships are extremely important. And then finally, our spiritual life. And, I always use the definition of spirituality of the general human experience of finding a sense of purpose, meaning, and connection. Whether you find that through an organization of faith, or if you find it through a community, or if you find it through, just the why. One of the books that I knocked off my reading list recently was A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, whose story was riddled with trauma, surviving, the prison camps during World War II. And there's a great quote from his book that says, a man can survive any what if there is a why, and talks about his experiences and seeing people in these prison camps that as long as they held on to some purpose or some meaning as to their suffering, that they could really go through anything. And I feel like it's super important to establish that spiritual purpose and that meaning for folks in recovery. And to kind of go back and tie this response all into one, cohesive thought, all four of those areas are equally important. I always use the analogy of a stool. All four of those areas, like all four legs of a stool, need to be strengthened and solid and addressed if you're ever going to use it to hold yourself up. And so I don't think any one is more important. I think it's the collective of the four. And working with a treatment team or a group of people in your life that understand the importance of all four areas.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. That's really great. I mean, thank you for sharing that with us. And I think I love the analogy of the stool. I mean, you can really kind of put it all into perspective by looking at it that way. So, Chris, I'm curious. Let's say we have someone who is listening right now, who's they're they're struggling with addiction, and they're aware that they have a problem, and they want to get some help for it. What's the next step they could take to do that?
I, one of the hardest parts that I experience with people looking for help with addiction or with getting into treatment is being able to ask for help. I knew for myself that was one of the hardest parts was having to take that initial step or exercise the courage, if you will, to ask for help. I was riddled with shame. I was riddled with fear. And as a result, it was almost easier for me to consider taking my own life rather than asking for help. Figured it would be easier. um, and and so the message or the what I would give to the person out there that's listening or that might be listening is to take that next step. You don't have to be, it's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote that you don't have to be able to see the whole staircase, just be willing to take the first step. And that first step is really being able to reach your hand out and ask for help. um, and making sure that we're, with that, making sure that we're asking for help in the right places. Asking for people. There are plenty of qualified treatment providers and people out there who, this is their work, this is their mission, is to be able to help connect people with resources and provide people with help. And so to not allow fear to challenge you or to prevent you from getting what you rightfully deserve and asking for help.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know it's not always an easy step to take, but definitely an important one if you want to kind of get down that path to healing.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes folks express the fact that they've tried to ask for help before, and they've struggled, or they didn't feel that the help that they were looking for was provided to them. And I think this is the message that I had the last time I was on here, and it was, if it doesn't connect the first time, keep going. Never give up, just keep going. It's so important. I work with people day in and day out who struggle with the process of relapse and substance use, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I relapsed, or I've had multiple relapses, and I'm like, well, you got to keep going. Recovery is not measured, in my eyes, recovery is not measured in days. Recovery is measured in quality. We spend a lot of time focusing on how many days or hours we have in recovery, and not realizing the quality of that recovery is the important thing. Don't get caught up in the relapse, or don't get caught up in the amount of time since the last drink or the last bad day, but get caught up in the amount of, like, how much positive are you bringing to your life or putting into the lives of others today. And that's what really the message of recovery, I'm hoping, is becoming, as it becomes more enlightened over the past couple of years.
Hmm. Yeah, such great advice there. And thank you for just kind of catching us up on what you've been up to, and sharing some of your expertise with us based on the work you're doing. What is sort of next for you, Chris? Do you have any future plans that you want to share with us?
Nothing in the immediate future. Like I said, I'm really excited to be here where I'm at Northeast Addiction Treatment Centers in Quincy. I'm really excited about growing and and coming on to a growing company here and being able to move forward with this organization. I don't have anything immediate in the plans other than to just work with this company, continue to grow, and continue to expand our outreach to the community and to the country as a whole, to be a resource for recovery.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. It sounds like you're just kind of getting started there. So I wish you all with it, and hope that you guys are able to do some great work in the field.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and and I appreciate the opportunity to have me back, and all the work that you do. It's amazing to see how your messages continue to spread from the time that we've met to today.
Yeah, thank you. Um, so Chris, how would you say that you're doing today? And, are there any things that you sort of still struggle with?
I think like all human beings, I struggle with the day to day activity. But my life is really for the most part been in a good place. As I had mentioned earlier, one of the things that I've struggled with most recently is the passing of my father about a year ago, and processing through that and really allowing myself to experience it. The feelings and the emotion that's connected with that, and understanding the grief and the loss. And it's been something that's been really, life changing for me. Obviously, it's obviously nothing I'd ever, I never hoped would happen, but something that we all kind of know will happen at some point. Um, but that's been my biggest struggle lately, both emotionally, and then being able to do it as a father, and a husband as well, to be able to show and experience that vulnerability, but also to be able to keep his memory there and to keep the positives of what who he was and what he was able to give to me, have been just finding that balance. And I always relate the idea of recovery to balance. I mean, that's really, that's it. And so in this process of recovery and healing through this grief, finding the balance has been probably my biggest struggle.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think balance is, just important with everything, right? And for anyone who, for all of us, I mean, we all, things come up in life, and, we struggle at times, and it comes down to finding that balance, right? That's what I think kind of helps to pull us through.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about balance that I've learned in terms of life balance is it's constantly shifting. Um, so what balances me today may not balance me, in 6 months from now or 2 weeks from now. And so just constantly being able to be adaptive, and shift that balance on the fly, and be aware when things are out of balance. And, I'm really fortunate to have a great family and great friends around me and great support network around me to kind of, who can call me out and let me know when I seem like I'm out of balance, or kind of help me get back on that balance beam, if you will, when need be. Because even given all my experience and knowledge with doing this, I still tend to be a poor self-evaluator. So I'm forever grateful for the people that are involved in my life that kind of help me find balance, or know when I'm out of balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said there was really important, that, it's about adapting too. Because what may help us in one situation or with one, struggle may not help us with something else. And so it's just, constantly looking for the things that can help us. And, if we have to kind of to shift what that is, then that's, what we have to do. And that's what, allows us to just kind of to keep moving forward. Right. And to be able um, to navigate through life, regardless of what sort of challenges it throws at us.
Yep. Yeah, it's all about navigation and adaptation.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today, and this is the same, final question that I had asked last time, and I'll ask it again since 2.5 years have passed, and your answer may be different now. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think last time is when I had used the quote, "Just keep going." And at this time, that definitely still strongly fits. But I think that the message that I would give now, that maybe builds off of that message, is that just keep going, that it gets better. I think that some of the folks that I work with, the message that I hear sometimes is like, I have kept going, and it doesn't seem like it gets better. And I'd just like to say, one of the messages that I try to instill is that, from what I've seen for a lot of folks, and when we keep going, things inevitably get better. It may not seem that way, and it may not feel that way, and it might be hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but ultimately, it's been my experience, the experience I've witnessed in the lives of so many others, that it does get better if we just keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And I think, it's like they say that, this too shall pass. Right. And like, no matter
Yeah,
what we're going through,
yeah,
like, yeah, just keep going, because whatever situation you're in right now, you're not likely to stay in forever. Things will just evolve, things will change.
exactly. Exactly, and I hate to confuse the message, and I just want to clarify. One of the things that I hear from folks is that it never gets easier. It just gets
Mm.
better. Life keeps coming at you, but there's a line that I've really stuck to over the past, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. That's really stuck with me, and it's a message from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that it's in the part of the book that many of us refer to as the promises, but there's one particular line that sticks out that says, "We will intuitively know how to handle situations which once baffled us." And I'm paraphrasing, so I may be off here or there, but it's amazing how the more that we keep going, the more that we stick to it, and keep putting our foot forward. Like those situations that used to overwhelm us and baffle us, now become part of our intuition. Like, oh, I know how to handle this, or oh, I know what to do from here. As long as we keep going and we keep adapting and we keep, it intuitively gets better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So yeah, thank you for sharing that message with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. Is there anything that we can do to help support you in what you have going on today?
Other than, feeling free to reach out to us if there's anything that we can do as an organization to provide help. I'll connect with you after our talk today and see if we can share resources to make our agency available to support any of your listeners who might be out there, who might be considering taking the next step and getting help. And just feeling free to have us as a resource, and myself as a resource for those who are looking for help with dealing with substance use or addiction and trauma issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you work with people just locally where you are, or can they be from anywhere in
Um,
the country?
so we take people, we admit and help people from all across the country. Our agency works closely with some community resources that can provide housing. So we have a lot of folks here who are from all over the country, from California to Oklahoma to all over the Midwest, as well as people locally here in New England. We're a provider for people across the country, and we'd be more than happy to offer that message and that level of support to anybody who, no matter where they are.
All right, that sounds good. So, well, Chris, I just want to, thank you for coming on today, and, for catching us up on what you've been up to since you were first on, and, just for, sharing your expertise with us in this area. So hopefully, it's provided some hope for anyone who's still struggling right now, and, we'll definitely have some resources available for them to utilize if they're looking for some assistance. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 140. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Chris Dorval and the number 2 to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you found this episode informative and that it has given you some hope if you're someone who is struggling yourself. And, do reach out for support, as Chris was mentioning here at the end. And be sure to head over to the show notes page to find some links to some resources that can be of assistance. And, feel free to reach out to Chris if there's anything that he can do to help. And do share this episode with anyone you know who is struggling with addiction, who you think, could benefit from hearing it. And other than that, come back in 2 weeks for the next episode. And also head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide, or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.